long before martial arts became something people consumed on screens, before tournaments were streamed online and before fighters became global celebrities, there were places where combat was treated almost like a language of philosophy. These places did not care about fame. They cared about understanding. In one quiet district of Japan stood a dojo that seemed to belong more to the past than to the present. It was not large, not decorated for show, and not designed to impress visitors. The building had aged slowly, like a tree growing thicker rings each winter. Its wood had darkened from time and smoke. Its floors carried faint grooves carved by decades of disciplined movement. To outsiders, it might have looked like just another training hall, but to those who knew its reputation, it was something else entirely. It was a place where fighters didn't go to win. They went to learn where their limits truly were. Inside that dojo taught a man who had spent most of his life mastering one thing: certainty. The old master was not loud, and he never advertised himself. Yet his name moved quietly through martial arts circles like a whispered warning. Those who trained under him spoke of discipline so precise that even breathing seemed part of practice. For nearly half a century, he had offered the same test to visiting fighters. He never framed it as a challenge, and he never used it to humiliate anyone. He simply explained it the way one might explain gravity. He would lift his sword calmly, look at the visitor and say, "My blade will reach you before your hand reaches me." And year after year, this statement proved true. Fighters came from different styles and different countries. Some were strong, some were fast. Some carried the confidence of undefeated records. But confidence often fades when a weapon enters the space between two people. Many challengers focused on speed. They believed that if they launched forward quickly enough, they could close the distance before the sword completed its motion. Yet, speed alone rarely saves someone reacting to something already moving. Others tried strategy. They watched carefully, waited for an opening, tried to anticipate the swing. But anticipation can easily turn into hesitation, and hesitation is enough for steel to complete its work. The master never celebrated these outcomes. Convinced that the lesson spoke for itself. To him, the sword was not just a weapon. It was proof of discipline, proof that repetition, patience, and focus could create something nearly unstoppable. Then, one winter afternoon, news began to circulate through martial arts circles in Japan that a visitor had arrived whose reputation was spreading across continents. He was not known for carrying weapons. In fact, he was known for questioning them. He spoke openly about freedom in movement, about adapting instead of memorizing, about the idea that real combat was not about tradition but about awareness. That visitor was Bruce Lee. By that time, Bruce Lee was already gaining attention internationally. Some saw him as a revolutionary thinker in martial arts. Others saw him as someone who challenged traditions too boldly. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: he moved differently. He did not treat martial arts as fixed patterns. He treated them as expressions of timing, distance, and perception. When the old master heard Bruce Lee was in the country, he did not send a formal challenge. He sent something much quieter, an invitation to visit the dojo and share ideas. When Bruce Lee arrived, the students noticed immediately that he carried himself differently from most visitors. He did not walk with the rigid posture of someone trying to prove strength. He removed his shoes carefully, bowed deeply, and stepped inside with a calm awareness of the space around him. There was no dramatic tension in his movements, no visible anxiety. But there was also no arrogance. He behaved like someone who respected the place he had entered. The students watched silently as he approached the center of the room. The master observed him for a long moment before speaking. "I have heard," the old man said slowly, "that you believe the body itself is enough in combat." Bruce Lee nodded slightly. "I believe the body is what we are born with," he replied. Not the confidence of someone dismissing tradition, who had thought deeply about what truly matters in movement. The master stood and reached for the sword resting beside him. As the blade left its sheath, a familiar metallic whisper filled the room. Even the students who heard that sound daily felt their attention sharpen. "I offer every serious visitor the same opportunity," the master said. "You will have 2 seconds." The room grew very still. Bruce Lee did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the master's stance, the distance between them, and the subtle way the sword was angled. It wasn't the look of someone intimidated. It was the look of someone analyzing structure. "May I ask something first?" he said. The master gestured for him to continue. "In all the years you've given this test, what do your challengers usually try to beat?" "The sword," the master replied, "because the sword is what threatens them." Bruce Lee gave a faint smile. "Then maybe they lose because they fight the wrong thing." A few students exchanged glances. No one had spoken to the master like this before. Not disrespectfully, but with such direct clarity. Bruce Lee continued in a calm voice. "A weapon moves quickly, but it does not move alone. Before the blade moves, the arm moves. Before the arm moves, the body commits. If someone waits to react to the blade, they are already late." The master listened without interruption. "Understanding must be proven through action," he said finally. He raised the sword. The dojo fell completely silent. Even the faint winter sounds outside seemed distant now. The students watched closely, sensing that something about this moment felt different from past tests. Bruce Lee stood 4 feet away. No dramatic stance. No clenched fists. Just balanced stillness. Inside, his focus was not on speed alone. He was watching for the first signal of commitment. The tiny shift in the master's body that would come before the blade truly became dangerous because direction follows. The master inhaled slowly. Then the sword began to fall. For a brief instant, Bruce Lee remained still. Some students thought he had hesitated. Then, in a movement so smooth it almost looked natural rather than explosive, he stepped forward and lowered his center at the same time, slipping beneath the descending blade rather than trying to outrun it. But he didn't attack the sword. He reached for the wrist, guiding it. Before the blade could finish its arc, Bruce Lee's hand met the master's arm, not violently, not forcefully, but precisely enough to stop the motion at its source. The sword froze mid-air. Silence. No clash. No dramatic strike. Just a simple interruption of movement at the exact point where control lived. For the first time in decades, someone had reached the master before the blade completed its fall. Bruce Lee released the wrist immediately and stepped back, bowing with respect. "I didn't need to defeat your sword," he said quietly. "I only needed to reach the moment where it begins." The master looked at his hand, then at Bruce Lee. After a long pause, he laughed softly, not from embarrassment, but from realization. "All these years," he said, "I believed the blade was my greatest strength. But today, I see it also shaped what I expected others to see." Bruce Lee nodded. Double quotes: "Fear makes people look at the weapon. Understanding makes them look at the source." And in that quiet winter dojo, the lesson carried more weight than any victory ever had, because that day, Bruce Lee didn't just stop a sword. He changed how everyone in that room understood movement, timing, and perception. As Bruce Lee stepped back from the halted blade, the dojo seemed frozen in time. But inside his mind, a different world was opening. The movement he had just executed was not simply a response to the sword. It was the culmination of years, decades even, of observing life itself. Every punch, every kick, every subtle movement had been born from lessons far beyond the dojo. He remembered Hong Kong, 1958. A rooftop, the sun low in the sky, the city spread out like a living map beneath him. He was only 18, and yet he already carried a sense of observation beyond his years. A man approached with a knife. No rules, no referee, only survival. The man lunged, silver blade flashing. Most would watch the weapon. Most would fix their eyes on the edge, on the threat. But Bruce Lee had learned something early from his father, from the streets, from countless small fights that went unnoticed. The weapon is not what moves, it is the hand. The hand is what betrays intention, and intention always comes slightly before action. He had stepped inside the arc, ignoring the knife itself. He focused on the shoulder, then the elbow, then the wrist. In one fluid motion, he caught the attacker's wrist. The knife clattered to the rooftop below. Victory wasn't in being faster than the knife. It was in being earlier than the decision to strike. That principle had stayed with him every day since. It wasn't just combat. Understanding makes people act before fear ever chooses, and now, standing in the quiet Japanese dojo, facing a sword that had felled countless challengers over decades, he recognized the same pattern. The sword itself was not the enemy. The hand that wielded it, the source of motion, the human decision behind steel, that was what needed to be understood. He could almost feel the centuries of discipline behind the blade. The katana was more than metal. It was history made sharp. Every movement honed by countless mornings, hundreds of challengers, all designed to prove the same truth. Humans are slower than steel, but Bruce Lee knew that this truth was only half the story. Steel moves fast, yes, but decisions move slower than observation. An observation, when sharpened by awareness, could outrun both. He thought back to other moments, the crowded streets of Kowloon, the alleyways where he practiced balance and timing, the late nights spent studying martial arts manuals not just for technique, but for understanding of principles. The fights in gyms where he had tested his speed against people larger and stronger than him. Every one of these moments had taught him the same thing. Movement is only as effective as the mind behind it. The students in the dojo could not see these memories. They only saw a small man calmly standing ready. But in his mind, every lesson he had learned was converging into one decisive moment. He understood the human fear that made them react too late. He understood the pride that made them attack the wrong thing. He understood the patterns that had made every challenger before him fail. And that awareness, honed through years of trial, failure, and reflection, gave him power far beyond size or muscle. He inhaled slowly, feeling the winter air in the dojo. It was still, cold, and filled with centuries of expectation. Every student there had seen the test dozens of times. Some had imagined themselves in his position, fantasizing about victory. Others had witnessed countless failures and internalized. The lesson: the sword is unbeatable. Bruce Lee knew that to succeed, he had to act differently, not faster, not stronger, but wiser. He remembered the principle that had guided him since his youth. Absorb what is useful. Reject what is useless. Add what is your own. The sword was useful. Its threat real. But fear of it? Useless. Hesitation? Useless. What was his own? The ability to see clearly and to act decisively. He focused. Not on the blade, not on the master's hands, but on the connection between them. The space where intention meets motion. That was the target. The rest was irrelevant. Time seemed to stretch. He could feel the centuries of the sword's history press upon him. He could almost hear the echoes of every challenger who had failed, every life lesson embedded in its steel. But he did not flinch. He did not tense. He simply observed and waited for the exact moment to act. That is when the true mastery of Bruce Lee became visible, a mind that moved faster than the world thought possible, guided not by strength but by clarity. For the students watching, it appeared as though he had moved in an instant. But in reality, it was a lifetime of learning condensed into a single flowing decision. Every muscle, every thought, every experience had been aligned perfectly. And then it happened. He reached the source of motion, not the edge. The blade halted midair. Silence enveloped the room. For the first time in decades, a challenger had reached the master before the sword had completed its path. Bruce Lee released his grip, stepped back, and bowed respectfully. The dojo seemed to exhale collectively. The impossible had happened, and yet Bruce Lee's lesson was deeper than victory. It was about perception, about fear, and about the clarity that turns ordinary reactions into extraordinary insight. And maybe that's why Bruce Lee's legacy never faded. Not because of how hard he hit, but because of how clearly he saw. If you want more stories like this, real lessons, real fighters, and moments that changed martial arts history, make sure you subscribe now. Because the next story might change how you see strength forever.